if you look at Shastras, authoritative texts, if you look on Sangeet Shastra, the thing is, these give you a lot of information, but any substantial text I know cannot be understood without the explanation of somebody who is really in the line of the tradition. Otherwise, you're always read. I mean, it's just impossible because the old texts, like the Yoga Sutra or whatever, they are composed in such a concise language that these guys were able to, within one sentence, to say something which you need a year to think about, and you really need somebody who guide you. And then the commentaries, if they are of any substance, they are written by people who are deeply drenched in the subject and who, of course, have access to the tradition. Now, just one moment. I want to give one analogy. Like if you are singing, if you're learning one raga, Indian raga, the thing is that the Indians say either you just learn it by listening to it, by sun ke, yes, gara, and that's okay. You can imitate something you hear from a record, but this will be very far from being taught by a master, because the same phrase which you want to express, maybe you need really a year or maybe 5 years to study it. And if you just listen to it and replicate it, that's very far from the thing. At the same time, I'm just coming to an end. At the same time, I see from my experience, I've been following now the master musicians of this one family for 5 generations, and I hear them doing the same stuff, and I can see that in each generation, the same thing is expressed, but really in a different way. But that still keeps the tradition. Nobody walks out of that, because you would be kind of crazy to leave that, because that's what you care for. So, but even if it's in the personality of a man, it takes a certain character. Still, it's transmitted. And so, of course, I mean, why shouldn't you be connected to the intention, the authoritarian intention, because it came from a guy who told it the other guy, and so on. And if it's broken, then the thing is lost. Like if you see the European troubadours, their music has been lost because they all have been killed. So then the line is really stopped. Then you can really make it up again. But isn't that also, like you're talking about Patanjali, I think, is there really a way you just go to the book, open the book, and think you can understand that? I think that's a serious assumption.
Yes, I'm completely with you on that. That, of course, it's impossible to understand something, especially as sophisticated as Patanjali, just from the book. I mean, to give you an example, in general, what you're facing as a non-Sanskrit speaker, and having to read these things in translation. For example, I hate to say it, but it seems to me that many of the translators of from Sanskrit into other languages, especially these days, especially the more pop kind of translations, often look in Monier Williams' Sanskrit English Dictionary, or the equivalent in other languages, and pick and choose among the options that you get in a dictionary. You pick the word according to that it feels right to you, that it seems right to you, that it conforms with your idea.
I mean, that these guys are fools.
Well, but this is what we're dealing with today. I mean, if you pick up any of the editions of Patanjali's Yoga Sutra, you'll find this to be the case. Especially in the last 20 years, that it seems that they're just going for their choice of the options in the dictionary that sound good in the sentence they're writing, that feel right, that fit their theory or whatever. And then sometimes what they'll do is they'll take one of the options in the dictionary and put that into the thesaurus, and have even more words to choose from. And yet this has got nothing to do with the tradition and the intentions of Patanjali. For one, it's in the sutra style of composition, which means from the beginning that the intention of Patanjali is that it will be interpreted. A text that is written in a terse, almost computer-like code, taking out all the blank spaces, as it were, needs some sort of interpretation. And this is clearly what Patanjali and the intention of any of the other major authors or commentators must be. That there's going to be a lineage, and the lineage is going to provide the ongoing, by the way, oral commentary. And not until very recently has any of the commentary been written or printed or published. Peter?
Because there are commentaries by guys who know the stuff, and there are commentaries by guys who just make up something.
I would make a distinction here, because commentary, at least in European tradition and writing, really went out of fashion a couple hundred years ago, and what came into fashion was, I think, what we would probably call literary criticism. And under the guise of literary criticism, one may attempt to interpret a text or interpret a text, but this is different from an actual commentary, which is going along, must by definition go along with the tradition itself, I would think.
Like Patanjali Yoga Sutra. Either, to me it seems, that either you take the little task upon yourself to get a little bit of Sanskrit, so you know what these words are saying in a Sanskrit context, or you get a guy who really understands the stuff and is able to explain you, and he will, as you know, he will give you one word in the Sanskrit text, and he will talk about it for half an hour, because it has such a broad context, and slowly over the years you get some idea of what it's about. But if it's just a translation, man, it just cuts out all the stuff. So the thing is, to do any serious study, you have to put in a serious amount of energy, and if you don't want to do that and you rather discuss if you can find out the intention of the guy who wrote it or not, I think that's besides the point, because you can, I mean, that's another point that you go very deep into the language and all that, but the thing is, I mean, what you want to do is to understand it. So you cannot understand it by starting with the idea that you cannot understand it because you don't know the intention anymore. But that's what what they call the oral or whatever tradition really makes, that it's really transferred from one guy to the other, and it depends on your impression. If you think this guy is really saying something which makes sense, then you assume that it comes from an older source, and it's not just because it's old, it's because it makes sense. If somebody can give you, really take something out of the Yoga Sutra and understand it, then here you are, you know.
Right.
Well, this is when we talk about authorial intention, then it seems like the intention isn't sort of what I would call direct communication, but that's not right. I guess the intention is to encourage someone to study with others, with contemporary people who know what this is about, rather than just to get some information across.
Well, yes, I think that in the case of Patanjali, remember that the situation is so different from what you would imagine today, for what you do today. Disciples didn't just appear. Disciples were often there from the time they were 3 years old. And disciples didn't just show up for a class. Disciples lived there, and they washed the dishes, and they cleaned the dhuni, and they did everything else. And there wasn't a call for new disciples. There was no proselytization. There was no marketplace where Patanjali or his disciples would go out and sell their wares or try and attract new disciples. That this was very much a sort of a self-contained system, and it was a relatively small group of disciples, and it went on in the same way for a couple thousand years with no basic changes in that basic structure. But you see, what is interesting is that the world changes. The historical circumstances occur. There were a number of invasions of India. There was changes of political boundaries and rulers and so forth. There was an effect on the social relationships. Languages changed and so forth. So for a tradition to survive thousands of years, there's only one way I think that it's going to be able to do so, and that's by remaining dynamic, by the people of a particular time adjusting to the circumstances of that time without losing, let's say, the important elements of the teachings, both intellectually and ritually and otherwise. So this is what has happened in many of the Indian traditions, that it's, as Peter said, passed down from guru to disciple, from mouth to ear, from mouth to ear via hot breath. So in other words, there's also a question of proximity involved here. We're not talking about being passed down by somebody sitting up on a stage and 10,000 people in an audience. We're talking about a proximity and passing it down from mouth to ear, and not passing it down in one shot or in a teacher training class or something like this, but passing it down over a lifetime. And so you have a accumulation of many full lifetimes involved in this, in making the commentary and passing it down. And again, when I say making the commentary, I don't mean writing a book. There is a commentary, which is the way that this is interpreted for others, not for one's private silent reading, but in an oral communal exercise.